going on, everybody? You're tuned into the 48 Laws podcast. My name is Rudy Mulamba.
And I'm John Carp.
And let's get into this book. This episode, we're going to do laws number 1 and law number 2. Law number 1 is never outshine the master. And the judgment is always make those above you feel comfortably superior. In your desire to please and impress them, do not go too far in displaying your talents, or you might accomplish the opposite. Inspire fear and insecurity. Make your masters appear more brilliant than they are, and you will attain the heights of power.
Very nice.
All right.
So, Robert Greene, in each of these chapters, he lists either a transgression or an observance, or both in some cases. Sometimes he'll list multiple in each category. I'll go over both of them real quick that he lists here, both the transgression and the observance. The first one is the transgression, which concerns the finance minister in France under Louis XIV. His name was Nicholas, I think it's Fouquet.
Yeah.
Is that right?
I read it as Fouquet.
Fouquet?
Yeah.
Okay. Disclaimer to all people who speak French. I don't know a lick of French whatsoever. Yeah. We're going to be encountering a lot of French people along this podcast. And so I'm just going to apologize in advance that my French pronunciation is very poor.
Yeah, don't send us angry letters.
Yeah, I'm just leave me alone. But you said Fouquet.
Fouquet, yeah.
Fouquet. Okay, yeah. Fouquet. Anyway, so Fouquet, he was, as I said, he was Louis XIV's finance minister, and he was really gunning for the position of being, I believe it was prime minister.
Yep.
And but Louis decided to forego the prime ministership. I guess he thought it was, useless. Yep. And this really upset Fouquet, and he decided, I know what I'll do. I'll win the king's favor by throwing this really kick-ass party in his honor, right? Mm-hmm. So he did. He not only did he throw a wonderful party, but he even hired a playwright to write a play specifically for this party.
Yeah.
And he invited the king and all the noblemen and all the important people in France to his house. And he had these very lavish gardens and whatnot.
I think he had Molière do the play.
Yeah. Yes, he did. Mm-hmm. Yeah. People at the party were just like, oh man, this 4K guy, he really, can throw a kick-ass party.
Yeah.
And Louis was like, he's showing me up, man.
Yeah. So,
in fact, Lou is so vain about it that he decided after the party, a couple days later, he charged Fouquet for these trumped up charges about basically money laundering, which, by the way, Fouquet was guilty of, but he did it not only with the king's permission, but for the benefit of the king.
Exactly.
But it didn't matter. The king trumped those up and sentenced Fouquet to isolation in the Pyrenees Mountains for the rest of his life. Yeah, until he died there.
Incredible.
And so that's the transgression example of this law.
Okay.
An observance of this law would be something that Galileo did when he discovered the moons of Jupiter. At this time in Renaissance Italy, scientists would get funding for their research and their projects from oftentimes government officials. And in Galileo's case, he was being funded by the Medici family, who at the time were Cosimo II was the head of the Medici family, right? Mm-hmm. So Galileo didn't want to upstage the Medicis by finding this incredible discovery, but he also wanted his work to be published and recognized, right? Yep. Well, it just so happens that there were 4 moons that Galileo discovered around Jupiter. And as chance would have it, the symbol for the Medici family is Jupiter. So he attributed Jupiter to being symbolic of Cosimo I, which was Cosimo II's dad, and then the 4 moons to be Cosimo II and his 3 brothers. And it kind of, he's sort of made this metaphor showing that even the heavens agree that the Medicis are the rightful rulers of, I think it was Florence, Italy.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah. And so not only was he able to publicize his discovery, but he was also able to honor the Medicis and win their gratitude, and therefore secured future funding for his projects.
Absolutely. I feel like it's those two examples kind of illustrate two different sides of obviously there's a transgression and an observance, so there are obviously two sides of the coin. Just going back to Fouquet's example, I think that kind of touched on, first of all, the process. Really, the party that Fouquet threw was it was for him. You know what I mean? Like, it was, here's this new palace that I live in, and I'm gonna invite the king in, and I'm gonna do all this really cool. I'm gonna do a bunch of cool stuff there, and like, it's the king was the guy who was like the main person, the man of honor or whatever it was.
Yeah.
But really, Fouquet was kind of just pumping himself up the whole time. I feel like what he wanted to do is he wanted people to see how cool he was, and how knowledgeable he was on things, and how kind of noble and just kind of how cultured he was. At the same time, he thought by doing that it was going to kind of appease the king, and the king would just see how indispensable he was. On the other hand, what all that did was it really kind of offended the king's insecurity and things like that. And I feel like that's really all the story points to. And that was the error in Fouquet's ways. For the second story with Galileo, I know in the book they talked a lot about how he had spent a lot of time trying to get funding from people, but he had a bunch of different patrons. And what he did there by elevating the Medici's name, like Casimiro the first and the second, and all those guys, he elevated their status really, and he made them more than just people who what he used to do is he would find something, discover something, write a book or whatever, and he would just give out gifts to his patrons. Like, this is what I did. The money you gave me or the gifts you gave me ended up being this, but it didn't really elevate the people in any way. It just made them. He just really gave them gifts by doing what he did for the Medici family. It elevated their name, and so they looked better than everyone else. That's ultimately what Robert Greene's pointing at in this law. Really, your masters, the people who are above you, want to be elevated. They want to look better than they are. They are because they're. I think really what he's trying to say is everyone is insecure to the core, really. Like, you know, and by making them appear better than everyone else, you're that's how that's really what he wants, what he's pointing at here. You know, the goal is to make everybody appear greater than what they are in whatever realm, if intelligence, in terms of being cool even, or whatever else. So I think that's what those two stories kind of point to, in my opinion.
Right. Well, but if your goal is to achieve more power, many would be asking, well, why would you want to be, downplaying yourself?
Yeah.
Right? To make the people that you're working under seem better than you, Yeah,
I think the thing underlaying all of this is ultimately the reason why you're working with masters, or you have people who give you funding, is you really want something for them. So you're getting something from them too. It's kind of a symbiotic relationship where, Galileo wanted money so he could continue to do his experiments, continue to teach and all that. He needed funding for that reason. So by doing something like elevating other people who are insecure, who are thinking about the short term, right now I want to appear better than I actually am, or I want to appear this way, you're actually looking more long term, where your goal is, I want to secure funding so I can keep doing these things, so that later on, when I've done all my work, people could see my body of work and go, oh, this person is elevated. So you're doing the same thing, but I feel like the perspectives are different. So that's why, Fouquet was short-sighted too, because in the long term, he wanted to appease the king, but he was also really kind of showing out for himself too.
Right.
So I think that's what it is. I think ultimately it's about having that kind of long-term mentality where you go, I'm going to be humble. Really, this law is about humility. It's like I'm going to be humble and do this and take what I can take, so that I can continue to get I can kind of serve my master by doing the things that he or she craves and he or she wants, to kind of quell their insecurities. And if I do that and I keep them happy, I can continue to get what I want too.
Yeah. And as far as building on top of that idea, actually, it's if you wanted an example of how people would use it in current times, it'd be kind of like you're taking a job that you don't really care for, really, but there's something about that job that you're learning things that you can use for your future ambition. For example, if let's say you're working for Coca-Cola, right? Mm-hmm. You may not like the product of Coca-Cola. You might be more keen on promoting like a healthier option of like some kind of sweet beverage, but you really admire how Coca-Cola promotes its product.
Yeah.
And you really want to learn that. And then on the side, you kind of take what you're learning from working for Coca-Cola to put that in a brand that maybe you're developing and go, oh, this is how Coca-Cola is marketing its product. This is what I should do for my product.
Absolutely.
And then eventually when you get to the point where you're ready to, leave Coca-Cola and go out on your own, you've been able to, you can take what you've learned and by that time, hopefully you'll be able to surpass Coca-Cola and you can push your product and, maybe not supersede Coca-Cola, but at least be a competitor with them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's another cool thing about this law is it puts it puts kind of an importance into learning, right? So the reason why, and I say that this law really kind of it's all about humility, I think, and it puts that it just shows how important learning under somebody is too, because you obviously the example was good. The example for Coca-Cola, because obviously you're learning things while you're underneath. You're working at Coca-Cola. You're working under some master. You're putting in your time. You're trying to learn something from this person, and ultimately you can achieve what it is that you want to achieve. But it's about kind of just knowing and having kind of a long-term mentality on what it is that you're trying to do and kind of putting things into perspective that way.
Yeah. It does no good to jump up in front of the board meeting and go, well, I think this is better.
Yeah,
this is better.
Exactly.
Just roll the punches and
there's a lot of emphasis in this book specifically about kind of thinking more long term, and kind of dealing with conflicts in a way where you go, okay, is it worth it to react to this, or is it like I feel like you could apply this law if you're working with someone or if one of your bosses is very maybe very aggressive, very mean, or who really kind of focuses on maybe negative things too much. I feel like it's a good way to ground yourself where you say, okay, I'm trying to learn this thing from this person right now. So I'm going to have to deal with what it is that they're throwing at me. I'm going to have to be humble. Maybe one day I may want to yell back at him, but it's like I know that if I do that, I'm going to ruin this opportunity that I have to continue to learn under this person. So I think it's good in that way, and it just keeps reinforcing the fact that of how important it is to learn under people. You're worth so much more monetarily by just sitting back and just giving yourself time to learn under a person and to satisfy what they want, and then you just continually working on and continuing to learn what it is that you want to do. So
and it also pays to not be consumed by your vanity.
Yeah.
Also, a great example he gives in the book is of this Japanese tea master that was really admired by the Japanese emperor at the time. And in fact, so admired he had his own apartment in the palace and everything, and was kind of considered a key component of the emperor's court.
Yeah.
Well, this tea ceremony guy, he really let it get to his head, and ended up having like a statue of him made, and he placed it right where all the noblemen and women would be walking by so that they would notice this statue. And he was wearing sandals, which were a symbol of royalty and all that. And it's kind of a passive aggressive way of saying, you know,
I'm better than all of you.
exactly. Yeah. You know, like you don't want to be doing that because, you know, as this guy found out, you know, people don't take too kindly to that. And the emperor certainly didn't. And he ordered him to death.
Yeah.
Of course, this guy ended up taking his own life.
He killed himself. That's how disrespectful what he did was to the culture he was in at the time. That
in Japanese culture, it's actually it's considered if you bring a lot of shame, it's more honorable to take your own life.
Just kill yourself.
Yeah,
that's interesting, man.
Yeah, I don't think it's like that anymore, but in the traditional ways, it was
absolutely. Yeah, so it really kind of corrects for kind of your own ego and your own vanity. I think that's what Robert Greene's trying to point at, especially with that example, because in that situation, the person kind of saw that he was welcomed by the masters, and they kind of liked him, and he let that get to his head, and he was like, I can do whatever I want. So that's one thing I like about this law, is because it kind of corrects for your ego. You know, I think by constantly working under somebody and kind of having to appease them and serve them, you never let your ego go wacky out of control.
Yeah, I mean,
that's important.
You might be valued highly by whoever you're working under.
Yeah,
but don't let it get to your head.
Don't let it get to your head. Another thing too is, I think one thing that Robert Greene wanted to point out too with this example was that he's not necessarily saying you have to treat everyone this way. I think he made it pretty clear that he says don't. I think he was saying don't. Yeah, you don't have to try to appease everybody, just the people you're working under. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean, you could be, you could kind of be upfront, honest with everyone else. If they mean nothing to you. So really, if it's all about the people who can kind of further your self-interest and things like that.
Oh, totally. And another point he brings up is sometimes you can't help but being awesome at what you do.
Yeah.
You know? And
you'll naturally kind of offend people's insecurities and make them weird and just by being yourself.
Yeah. I mean, so you can either do one or two things. You can either avoid people who are just prone to jealousy, which would be the best thing you can do. But sometimes you might be in a situation where you can't.
Yeah.
So if you're in a situation, like, for example, if the person you're working under is very prone to jealousy, but you need that job for whatever reason, you might be stellar at what you do, but keep your awesomeness in check and make sure that
your colors a little bit.
Yeah, hide your colors a little bit, so to speak. Yeah.
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 I don't know. How do you think about, what do you think of that part of it specifically? Do you think that's something that's, have you ever been in a situation like that, or do you think that's something easy to do even, or?
Where I was outshining the master?
Yeah.
I really can't think of a time.
Yeah.
I mean,
because when I first read this too, like I couldn't necessarily relate, because I don't think I've ever really been in a situation like that where I was so awesome at what it is that I was doing, and my boss was so insecure that I had to, put myself in the box in that way.
Yeah, and I think that another point is, I think most of the time people you work under, they end up becoming your mentors, and most mentors kind of want to see their proteges be successful.
Yeah. See them shine.
And I think most proteges want to recognize the people that help them get to where they're at. Mm-hmm. So I think it's one of those things where, generally speaking, you probably don't have to really worry about this particular law.
Yeah.
But you might be in a situation where you definitely want to bear this in mind, because it's not like every single person on the planet thinks that way. Yeah. And in fact, quite a lot of people don't, particularly, people who run big companies.
Yeah.
Because they're it's about the bottom line.
Yeah.
They're
trying to make what they do run.
Exactly.
They could care less about them. They're actually focused on something bigger than them.
Yeah.
So I think that's another good thing about how Robert Greene frames this, which is, after going through some of these laws, you'll see that there's kind of a theme throughout, which is his kind of pessimism about about humanity in a way. He tends to think that pretty much everyone's insecure, everyone's vain, and I think that might be a good way to look at things, because it's kind of like the worst case scenario kind of thing. So if you treat everyone, if you treat everyone that you work under this way, you're really not going to run into much problems. I think most people are going to like that, and they're going to continue to keep you under them at their tutelage.
I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of times when I talk to people about this book, they say it's ruthless and this is just some greedy person writing their 2 cents to get other people to be greedy. And you could totally read it that way. You can also, take a couple steps back and read it like, well, you could take in that direction, or you can find ways to apply it in a moralistic way.
Absolutely.
And I think maybe even more importantly, you can take this book and read it as a sort of this is what you need to look out for, because this is what people who are power hungry, this is how they act, this is how they think.
This is what they're trying to do to you.
Exactly. Yeah. So like in the case of this law, it's worth remembering that there are people who are above you who are very petty, depending on where you're working, what your situation is. So, you don't want to, if you want to keep that job, or if you want to further yourself while working for this individual, you want to keep that in mind to not upset them.
Absolutely.
So, it's one of those things to think about.
Definitely. Absolutely. Well, in that case, let me go ahead and switch gears and go over talk about the reversal a little bit. Typically, Robert Greene does this at the end of every chapter, where he talks about the whether or not the reverse of this law works, what applications there may be, and I think that's a good way to really kind of check how valid the law is. But he says that there's some situations where you could be working under someone where it's actually better to outshine them, and those situations are cases where you're working with what he calls a falling master, a falling star, someone who might have been better at what they did in the past, but maybe they lost, they're not as good anymore. So if you're in a situation where you're working under them, but you can kind of outwit them, outsmart them on certain issues, it's good to do that, especially when they're on the way out. Apart from that, those are the only situations where it's better to outshine your master than to kind of mute your colors and work under them.
Yeah, I mean, it's a particularly ruthless tactic.
Yeah.
But at the same time, let's say you're in a company and this person's running the company in the ground because they've just become so incompetent.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's ruthless to kind of show them up at that point. But think about it this way, it's for the interest of the company too.
Exactly.
Yeah. That, it's kind of one of those things where if the leader falters and they're not able to lead anymore, then somebody's got to jump up and grab the reins.
Absolutely.
So, it's one of those things you have to measure out the circumstances. Or if you're kind of like or if you've been working for this one company for a long time and you just really don't care for this company, and you're wanting to advance a different side project you've been working on, this is your opportunity to really knock down the competition, so to speak. Yeah,
absolutely. And I would think a lot of people who are in a situation where they've been learning under someone for so long and they've actually really learned a lot, and they've gotten to a point where they're now a master, but they're working with someone who's still petty, who's still kind of mean to them, who kind of uses them and everything like that. Once you're at a point where you could do your job better than that person, I would feel like someone who gets to that point has been planning for that since day one. So every slight you might have gotten, every anytime the person kind of tried to be petty with you, it all comes back and you go, now's my chance to kind of knock them down and do what they do. I feel like a lot of people who might have had that long-term mentality when they started were thinking about that day when the master can't do what he can do anymore. And now I'm that person.
Yeah, you're kind of removing the scab at that point.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times these people are, they bring a lot of problems.
Exactly.
A lot of times.
Exactly.
So, and we'll find this throughout the book that some of these laws can be used for good and they can be used for bad. It's just really what your intention is.
It's all about your perspective.
Sure.
I feel like every law has a good and bad side to it. It's all about what you kind of bring to the table and what your intentions are.
Absolutely. I would endorse, use these laws for good. That's my position on it, and that would be my position on this law.
Absolutely.
And, I think it does apply.
Yeah. I think it applies too. I think there's Robert Greene wrote another book called Mastery. It's all about the process of becoming a master and whatever field it is that you do. And he talks a lot about apprenticeship, like the apprenticeship period, where it's important to spend a lot of time trying to spend a lot of time learning kind of the mundane details of whatever it is that you do, because when you become a master, you're going to be great at those little, the minutia. You have to be great at that. So he talks a lot about that, but also an even more important thing is kind of the discipline that you have to go through and the humility part of it. It takes a lot of time for you to really, I think, to really get great at something. You have to have that kind of mindset where it's not about me, it's about the thing that I'm doing. And I feel like working under someone who's even kind of who demands a lot out of you for whatever reason, whether it be pettiness or whatever else, it really does a lot for the ego. And I think it makes you better at the thing that you're learning. It makes you an even better master, which is why I think this law is great, especially for, kids who are starting out doing something, kids who are interning somewhere, who are in college, things like that. It's definitely a law that I wish when I was younger I knew more about so I could apply it more. But I think it absolutely holds, and 100% down with it.
All right.
Let's switch gears, move on to law number 2. And law number 2 is never put too much trust in friends, learn how to use enemies. The judgment is, be wary of friends. They will betray you more quickly, for they are easily aroused to envy. They also become spoiled and tyrannical. But hire a former enemy, and he will be more loyal than a friend, because he has more to prove. In fact, you have more to fear from friends than from enemies. If you have no enemies, find a way to make them.
All right. Well, Robert Greene gives both a transgression and observance, and I'm going to go over both because they give kind of different angles on the same law.
Okay.
And the transgression would be Michael III, who is the Byzantine emperor. And when he rose to power, he decided to put his best friend Basilius in the role of counselor. Basilius really did not have any experience in government whatsoever. As a matter of fact, he was a stable boy when Michael and him met. In fact, he actually saved Michael's life from a horse that had gone mad. So Basilius, kind of out of nowhere, all of a sudden attained all this power, right? And he worked behind Michael's back, essentially, to gain more power until he and some other conspirators eventually came to Michael in the night and murdered him. And he succeeded more power after that. I don't think he became emperor, but I think he gained more power by doing that. Yeah, I know. It's brutal.
Yeah.
Anyway, the observance, I should say, would be someone like General Chao Kunyong-yin. During the Warring States period in China, there was a constant one warlord would take over this part of China, and then they'd have like a life expectancy of like 2 years before they were, murdered, usually by their most trusted folks, actually.
Wow.
If not by another general who wanted to be king, basically.
Yeah. It's kind of like God, what's the name of that movie or that show that's out now? I forgot it. I forgot the name of the show. It's on HBO.
Oh, not Game of Thrones.
Game of Thrones.
Oh, okay.
Right? Because they're all after the seat.
Sure,
whatever.
yeah.
So there's a bunch of people trying to get there, right? So
yeah.
It's kind that, I guess.
Sort of. Yeah, you could. Well, we're going off on tangent, but
Yeah.
I will say this: the Game of Thrones is based off of the English War of the Roses,
Oh, okay.
which was basically a civil war.
Oh, okay.
So you're not too far off, actually. It is very similar to that. So what would happen basically in the Warring States period in China is basically a general would get murdered. It would essentially start a coup, and it would be another civil war. And it'd be like every 2 years there was another coup, another civil war. Until General Chao Kunying came around, and he defeated all these generals, right? Mm-hmm. And afterwards, he decided he was going to hold a dinner with all the generals that either fought against him or even fought with him. And he decided, listen.
That sounds like a setup, by the way.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was just going to say, that's what the generals thought. They were like, this guy's going to kill us right now.
Yeah.
He's inviting us over, and he's going to
get us drunk.
He's going to get us, And a lot of them were terrified, especially since he opened it up by saying, listen, I know that the life expectancy of a king is very short, and there are many among you who would like nothing more than to stab me in the back and take my position. Yeah. Especially when he said, he didn't say in those exact terms, but that was a meaning that he was conveying. Especially when he said something like that, the generals were like, yeah, he's totally doing us in.
Yeah. Which wouldn't be a bad strategy, by the way, to just get everyone there and off them.
It wouldn't.
You have no competition. I think that goes against what...
It wouldn't, but he did a complete 180. And he said, this is what I'm going to do. If you take an oath to lay down your arms, I will give you the land that you can live your lives out in peace. And they were like, holy crap, seriously? They're like, yeah, we'll do that.
Yeah. And
this provided a stability in China that was not seen. And in fact, this actually is what began the Sung Dynasty, which is one of the longest lasting periods, one of the longest lasting dynasties in Chinese history.
Oh, wow.
So there you go.
Yeah.
So in both cases, you have the transgression where Michael put way too much faith in his friend Basilius.
Exactly.
And, ended up on the sharp end of a sword.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, you have General Chao Kunyong-yin, who took to heart the idea that, keep your friends close and your enemies closer kind of a thing. And he treated his quote-unquote enemies like they were old pals.
Absolutely.
And be like, listen, if you don't mess with me, I'm not going to mess with you.
Yeah. Like you're saying, there's two very... Both of these examples are very important to the law, and they both they're kind of two sides to the coin, I guess. Where in one example, Basilius got to a point where he was kind of blinded by the power that he had gotten. So everything that he had gotten up to that point, he attributed to himself and not to what Michael III had given him. So to him, he felt like he was a self-made man. I was a stable boy, and I became this all by myself. And he completely forgot about everything Michael did for him. So he felt like he was due all the power that he had, which is why he went after it. In my opinion, he went after it so ruthlessly. At the same time, Michael was also blinded by the love that he had for his friend. So when he saw his friend doing wrong, he wouldn't quell it. He would just be like, oh, it's my friend. He's going to, tap out of it at some point or whatever. And he never did. So it shows you kind of the limitations you have when you're working with a friend. I think this is all within the context of work, where it's like or if not just work, but it's something that you're trying to get done with someone, where the importance should be on the task and not the relationship. The relationship is kind of secondary. And so it kind of shows that kind of limitation, the first example. And the second example, it just showed you how much you can accomplish by using your enemies, where there's not really a relationship there, but there's more like a, hey, look, we want to achieve this, so let's achieve this. Forget about the infighting. We can achieve more if we don't. So I think that kind of illuminates the law even more than just reading what it's about.
Yeah, I think bringing it to a context that people can understand. Maybe not so much the idea of keeping your enemies close. I mean, I can't really think of too many ways that would be all that beneficial.
Enemies is a weird word.
Yeah, it's kind
so
of
many things tied into it.
Yeah, but I will say the idea of keeping your friends close, I would say there's an old saying I say that goes, trust but verify. Mm-hmm. Especially like in the work context, like what you brought up. I don't think it's so much that friends, I don't think they let you down so much as they have malicious intent. Mm-hmm. It's more out of incompetence to do what you need for them to do in a work context. You don't necessarily want to hire friends, If your friend happens to be very competent at whatever task you're trying to get done that you can't do, that shouldn't be a problem as long as you guys can separate your personal relationship to get your work done.
Absolutely.
But that's something that a lot of people can't do.
It's a hard thing to do too.
It can be. Some people can do it though.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't shut down all friends, but just be very selective as to who you would have working with you, right? Or working under you for that matter, because that can also be that can lead to some conflict. I think Michael Thorne's the perfect example. Is why would you put your best friend Basilius in the position of counsel if he has absolutely no political experience whatsoever? I mean, this is insane.
Basilius would kill it out there in the stables, though. I'm sure he was great with the animals and all that.
If he was the masters of the stables, actually he was for a time before he became counsel. Yeah, because he went from a stable boy to like head of the stables.
And the reason Michael did that was because he saved him when one of the wild horses started flipping out and he fell off.
Well, I think Basilius probably was well suited for that job, but that's a completely different animal than being a consul in the Byzantine court. Yeah, exactly. I think that's just something to remember, and you can totally have friends in the workplace, but you have to remember that you got to get work done. Absolutely. And I think sometimes people just are not able to separate the two. It's also why workplace romances can be difficult. Exactly.
Because you're not there for the relationship. You're there for whatever task it is you're trying to do. There's something bigger than just the relationship. We're here to accomplish something. And the other side of it is the enemies angle, which again, enemies is an interesting word. It's loaded. There's a lot of things.
Why don't we put it this way? Your competition.
Your competition.
I think that's something people can relate to.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, especially in the war context. Yeah. Obviously. But he talks a lot about using your enemies, right? And the benefits that your enemies have, and things like that. So you could actually, one thing he talked about was, when you work with a friend, they seem to feel like they can get things from you easily, right? So they expect things from you, and your enemies or your competition doesn't, right? They're in a position where they're not expecting anything from you. So when they get something, then they feel like they owe you something. Your friends, on the other hand, you can give them as many things as you want, but they're your friends, so they'll be like, yeah, he should have given it to me, but I was kind of expecting he would, right? So it's and I think that's why the song example was so important, is because he didn't have to do what he did. He could have fought with them for years and years, but he told them, like, look, you guys clearly want something, so I'm gonna give that to you, and in return, you don't fight with me. We just all live in peace, and they agreed to it. So I think that's also that's just as big of a part of this law as the not letting your relationships affect work angle that he was talking about too. Right. Yeah. So it's kind of an interesting concept.
I mean, could you also say that the idea of keeping your enemies closer, if we're talking about in terms of competition from like company to company, isn't that kind of like you're sort of keeping tabs on your competition, seeing what they're up to,
seeing what they're doing?
Yeah. And kind of emulating that in a way.
That's true. But I think that's a way to do it. Yeah.
I think that's just another angle you could take with it.
And he also talked a lot about how you need competition. You need to know what other people are doing. You need to know what they're up to. You kind of need them to sharpen what it is that you do, and not make you lazy. and things like that. So, I mean, he kind of goes into depth about talking about ways that enemies strengthen you and make you better. And it's good to have them, and if you don't, to make them.
Oh yeah, that's that's like the cornerstone of capitalism. When you have competition, it generally creates a better product or service.
Absolutely.
For the consumer. If it's just like a monopoly, then that one company just ends up becoming lazy.
Exactly.
And their product goes downhill.
Definitely.
So it's better for innovation and better consumption of goods and services to have competition within a society.
Absolutely. I'm definitely with that. So I think labeling it as competition over enemies, I think in that context it definitely works, and I think the law applies, especially in that context.
Yeah, I think in that context especially.
Yeah.
I think the idea of if you're like your sworn enemy.
Your enemy.
Yeah, like
I don't even think that's really something people have nowadays, or maybe they just don't call it that.
Yeah.
But I mean, someone who dislikes you immensely, you going, hey, look, I'm gonna let you live in the palace next to me. I mean, that just sounds like a bad idea.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, maybe in foreign relations,
yeah,
we might have enemies.
Yeah,
of the state.
Yeah, and I think I think one important part of that too was he knew what they wanted. They were his enemies, sure, but he knew that they wanted what he wanted too. He wanted peace. He wanted to be able to, kind of live comfortably and all that. And they wanted that too. You would imagine back in that time. I mean, times maybe weren't great for some of those people. So
yeah,
if the opportunity to live in a palace or to live in a kind of
their own estate,
safe, exactly, that kind of opportunity is good for them.
I just think kind of in a modern context, it's silly. Why, like, think about it this way: why would you want ISIS to be close to you? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Exactly. Like, I don't see how that would be good at all.
that would be the worst thing ever.
You don't want to be buddy with ISIS. That's
exactly.
Like what? Yeah. They're out to like kill you. What are you doing, man?
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know. Well,
so we could switch gears, talk about the reversal a little bit.
Yeah.
For this,
let's do it.
The kind of interesting thing is, I feel like a good part of this chapter talked about really kind of a working relationship with people and how you should use your friends and enemies, quote unquote, or competition to your, I guess, positively. When he talks about the reversal, he kind of switches it up and he talks about ways that you can use your friends in a situation where maybe you need a scapegoat. If something's going wrong and you need someone to do something for you, but you don't want people to know that you did it, you can use one of the people that trust you and that like you and that would do anything for you, and you tell them to do that thing that really could be putting them in harm's way. That way, you get someone else to do it, and then if you lose that relationship, you lose it. It's not a relationship that maybe was the best for you, or you weren't as close with that person. But really, he's pretty much promoting kind of having a flunky, having someone who you keep in your circle that does your dirty work for you. And I feel like that's what he was saying was the reversal to this law, where you could actually, there's situations where you could use your enemies to better, use your friends to better effect than your enemies. So I don't know, it kind of threw me for a loop a little bit because I feel like he set up a context where this law works and then he introduced something else in the reversal.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I'm not keen on that reversal.
Yeah.
I think that's garbage.
Because we talk a lot about how really everything in this book you can use in a good way and in a bad way.
Yeah.
And I feel like we spent this whole time talking about the good ways we could use this in a specific context, and this other context is weird and kind of in a ruthless way, like to do things that meet your needs.
It's not that it's ruthless. I mean, yes, it is because it's ruthless. It's not just because it's ruthless. It's because it's also, on top of that, just really unnecessary.
Yeah.
I mean, really? You're going to throw your friend under the bus to what end? Yeah. Like, it's just, I don't know. I don't even see how strategically viable that is. Yeah. But especially
I don't see why to do it.
It's not only for a moralistic reason, but like I said, for a strategic reason. Why?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that reversal's garbage myself. But
also, I think it and I know we're going to talk about your reputation a little later, but
yeah,
that's a great way to ruin that reputation.
No kidding. What a great way to tarnish your reputation.
Exactly. So
let's go work with John. He throws his friends under the bus. No way.
So all in all, not down with the reversal. I think we're both kind of on the same page with that.
It's kind of contradictory to what you were saying, a law that we'll be talking about in the future here.
Exactly.
Which is another criticism of this book. Sometimes people have said that some of the laws contradict each other.
But
such is the nature of life.
And some people think some laws are the same, but just stated in different ways.
Yeah, possibly.
And others are perfect. They work together.
Yeah.
Some, Robert Greene even said there's some laws that you probably never use in your life, and there's some that you'd use over and over again.
Yeah.
So it's kind of all over the place, but I think that's the beauty of this book. That's why I like it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's very. I think the applications are very vast, and I mean, in my opinion, I feel like this book is written in a certain way, but it's really like a self-help book in disguise. It's kind of like
you could say that.
Yeah, it's like a wolf in sheep's clothing. It's a sheep in wolf's clothing. Yeah, that's what it is. So that's kind of how I take it. I think it's intended to help, and it's intended to really motivate yourself, and it's intended for you to be a better person. But you kind of have to get the people who are always on the margins who go like, oh, this is stupid, that's stupid, to be like, oh, I could buy into this,
Yeah, it's just a matter of how you color it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think the law holds. I like it a lot because I feel like it's thinking on another level, right? It's kind of I like the way he presents the way you would think to use, but really I like the way he talks about how you can use the relationship with your enemies in a positive way, where it's like you could actually do things with them and both achieve your needs that way. So I'm definitely down with that. I feel like friendships are important too, and I feel like they have a space in your work too. I mean, I feel like you don't always have to be completely robotic at work, and you don't have to work with people you don't like. But I think it's about kind of being measured with that, and knowing why you're doing the things that you're doing. I think ultimately when you're working on a task, you should know that the goal is to get the task done, not to do the task with people I like. So I think once you know that, and once you also know how you can use your competition in a good way, where steel sharpens steel, or you learn from them, or you learn from their mistakes, or you do whatever, I feel like it's very useful in that way. But all the talk about using your friends as a flunky and all that stuff, I don't think I can buy into that. But I think I like this law because it kind of presents things that you would think is negative, like your enemies, in a positive way, and then there's a way to use even bad relationships in a good way. I think that's what I buy into mostly with this law.
You and I are 100% on the same page.
That sounds good. Well, in that case, we've talked about laws 1 and law number 2. I've been Rudy Mulamba.
And I'm John Carp.
Signing off.